having attended numerous hearings at this point, there's something that always strikes me about the makeup of the panels. What we have is we have three gentlemen that actually produce things. One is the Mr. Horton with the Minnesota Forest Industries, producing timber so that we have housing in our country and can address a situation where we have a housing crisis in this country and have a shortage of timber. We have a gentleman who works to produce electricity so that we can live in a civilized society and so that our government employees can live the kind of lives that they live with all of the amenities associated with that. And we have a gentleman who represents the Livestock Association, and they produce food. The two other witnesses are government employees, neither of whom really produce anything, but have a lot of opinions about such things as the government using sticks in order to beat our producers into submission to do what our government employees and our law professors want them to produce. I definitely disagree with the idea that Republicans are not conservationists, that we don't care about the environment and we don't care about species recovery. But we also recognize that when a government does things that it should not be doing, it eventually becomes incapable of doing the things that it should. The point that Ms. Luna keeps making is that to the extent that we focus on species that are not endangered, or that we focus on habitat that is not critical habitat, and we spend our resources in trying to protect that, or in limiting our timber companies from operating, or our mining companies from being able to produce the resources that we need, again, for a civilized society, or we prevent our farmers and ranchers from producing food, eventually we're going to become the very kind of third world countries that really don't care very much about the environment. I think if you go to the Congo and a variety of other countries, you can see how they in fact treat the environment. So what I want to do is I always want to focus on the best way we can use the limited resources that we have. And I recognize that printing money, as we have been so recklessly for the last couple of years, and having government spend the massive amounts of dollars that it has only increased the cost of everything from food to transportation, to our ability to, again, produce electricity, to be able to produce our livestock, to be able to produce food. So what we want to focus on our side of the aisle is the pragmatic aspect of producing resources while also protecting our species. One of the things that I know from working with the Endangered Species Act for years is that while I do believe that it was intended as a good bill, a good piece of legislation for purposes of protecting species, has evolved over time to something that is used quite readily by environmental groups and NGOs to control land and water solely for the purpose of controlling land and water. In other words, it makes the environmental groups massive amounts of money to try to prevent us from producing electricity, producing timber, producing livestock. But it has not been as successful at protecting these species. And I think, Mr. Girton, you were just about to admit there have been an awful lot of resources that have been expended on the smelt, I believe, and the northern spotted owl that was, in reality, probably money that was misspent. So I don't think that it's fair to take the position or to imply that by pushing back on the idea of some of what I think are rather ridiculous efforts to control our ability to produce food and resources, that means you're anti-environmentalist and all you want to do is destroy the species, because we don't. But we do want to use our resources in the most effective manner possible. And so I also want to say, Mr. Fishman, who is it who's responsible for legislating in this country? Is that the legislative branch? As a law professor, isn't that what the legislative branch is supposed to do?
Yes.
Okay. And in terms of the experts, I know you talk about experts quite a bit, but some of the experts over time have made some pretty serious mistakes in terms of the species that we've been talking about today. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Girton? And it's cost us millions, if not tens of millions of dollars.
I'm not sure I agree completely, Congresswoman. No, there's been a lot of trade-offs have been made. Priorities are set. The vision is always for the agency to prioritize where we'll make the most significant impact. And we agree with you. Make the investments where they'll make the most significant impact for the country, for our wildlife heritage.
That's
and
right.
for our
But we
people.
also have to be able to produce resources in order to generate the revenue so that we can spend it on government employees and law professors so that they can expound on the things that they really don't know a lot about, such as producing food, producing timber, and producing electricity, correct?
Congressman, it's an annual appropriation we go through to get this resources for the Fish and Wildlife Service. We're in there with every other federal agency coming to Congress. I understand the Constitution. Congress provides the funding, and so we come to you and
And
your
we also
colleagues.
prioritize where we want to spend
Yes,
the
I
money as
understand
well.
that, Congressman,
Correct.
Congresswoman.
I yield back. You know, and my observation from earlier today seems to hold true. Ms. Olson, Mr. Brown, Mr. Semenko, you're all involved with food production and actually providing the resources we need to survive, while the other two are more of the government employee types who don't produce, but are very willing and able to regulate all of you out of existence if they have that opportunity. I hate to tell you, Mr. Brown and Ms. Olson, that as long as there is an unwillingness to acknowledge the impact that wind turbines are having on the right whales and other species, your industry and industries like yours are going to continue to be blamed. And I apologize for what your federal government is about to do to you and these agencies. Mr. Semenko, I want to thank you for your testimony. As you know, I'm a water attorney and I have dealt with the Endangered Species Act for many years. In June 2022, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Marine Fisheries Service announced the rescission of the Trump-era regulation definition of a critical habitat. This decision made it easier for radical environmental groups to target farmers, miners, and property owners by weaponizing the ESA against them. In my years of experience with the ESA, I've witnessed the same problem that you highlighted in your testimony, that there's no accountability for the failure stemming from the implementation of these laws. Currently in the West, we're experiencing the consequence of this failure as federal water supplies are being redirected for water conservation purposes and towards other uses. We are also experiencing catastrophic forest fires, not because of climate change, but because of failed forest management policies that come out of Washington, D.C. While we on this committee are doing what we can to hold federal agencies accountable for neglecting important irrigation development projects, the reversal of the Trump-era definition of critical habitat provides yet another political weapon that environmental groups get to use to target water users and project developers. Under such a convenient new definition, federal agencies can designate man-made surface infrastructure projects such as reservoirs as canals as critical habitat. And these kinds of designations negatively impact our farmers, ranchers, recreationalists, and all water users alike. Mr. Semenko, what kinds of negative impacts have you seen, specifically on agricultural communities, when critical habitat designations are made on man-made infrastructure?
Congresswoman, thanks for the question. It's great to see you in your capacity here as a member of Congress. Thank you for the question. We've seen freezing of the ability to move forward with projects. You don't know what you can do and what you can't do. And when it's one thing, in trying to approach this from a common sense, nonpartisan perspective, it's one thing to look at areas where species currently occupy vast, huge swaths of area, for example, with the anadromous fish. It's quite another to look at an area where the fish doesn't exist. There's no prospect for it to exist. I've been in meetings with NOAA Fisheries where they actually talked about the need to preserve areas as potential habitat above a 212-foot waterfall where salmon have never existed, because sometime in the future we might need a cold water refugia because of climate change. Maybe, sort of, it could happen. Even though the fish have obviously never, and then I was corrected, well, we don't know what kind of seismic shifts have occurred. Maybe fish did used to be above Shoshone Falls in eastern Idaho. So again, it's a freezing of the ability to know what you can do and you can't do. And as you know, when people need to invest money or looking at investing money in projects, you need to have some level of certainty. That's a hallmark of water law. in the western United States, the certainty and the finality that's allowed by water rights. The other thing I wanted to mention is this definition we're talking about that's been repealed, it was in response in large part to the 2018 decision in Weyerhaeuser. It was a responsible response to dealing with the issue identified by the U.S. Supreme Court. The definition says, for the purposes of designating critical habitat only, habitat is the abiotic and biotic setting that currently or periodically contains the resources and conditions necessary to support one or more life processes of a species. That's it. That's all it says. But it does make you look and focus at, is this really an area that's necessary to support the species in the future?
I very much appreciate that explanation and appreciate all your testimony. Appreciate you being here. Good luck. We're going to do whatever we can to help you. Thank you.